Hello, and welcome to this series, The Person of the Therapist. Now, I'm Dee Preston Dillon, and my guest today is Marshall Lyles. In this process, in this series, our intention is to open up what is it that really grounds the clinician? What was their historical moments, their path, their journey, if you will, to become a therapist? What had they discovered about this remarkable field and wisdoms that they have to share? So, with that, I'd like to welcome you, Marshall. And let's begin with grounding us in your field, your discipline, your theoretical leaning, and also your specializations.
Sure. Thank you, Dee. It's always good to chat with you, and thank you for having me. So I live in Austin, Texas, and my master's was in family psychology. So it was a program that brought in only small cohorts, and we were trained traditionally in the school of MFT ideology, but we were also prepared to become psychological associates in case you wanted to go that path. And so we had dual, internships in both therapy and testing. Um, and the theory I was drawn to from the beginning and was attachment. Attachment theory has always been um, my world, and in certain circles in the therapeutic world and other spaces where I also belong, attachment theory isn't identified as a clinical theory. That's not how I was trained in the MFT discipline. So I've welcomed in other theories and modalities based on the other circles that I'm a part of. And so I've done some study in Adlerian um, psychology, and in particular Adlerian play therapy with really the writings and lovely teachings of Terry Cotman. Um, I've also, my background had a lot of more systemic um, thought to it. And so even as attachment kind of crosses over into some of the other family systems models. But in more recent years, probably starting about 15 years ago, I became EMDR trained and certified, and then eventually a consultant. And so there is a large organic
Mm,
EMDR part to me. I'm
yes.
not as much a traditionalist in anything, but there are a lot of EMDR informed elements to me. And then the other really kind of theoretical influence, and has probably been the most profound, is the work of Bonnie Badenoch. And so I've feel very drawn to the way that she talks about inner community, how
Mm.
she welcomes in relational neuroscience and attachment
Mhm.
into, a very gentle way of coming to know that your memory networks hold more than you in them and how they become expressed. And so that reaches for my systems and my attachment and the Adler. And so there's a lot of crossover in those different, more theoretical ideas. I guess through the modality, Santre has always been a big part of my life, and poetry,
Uh-huh.
um, and then ceramics actually. So I sit here today. My studio is a part ceramic studio, and so I do a lot of work in the clay with people. So all of those theoretical leanings kind of then funnel their way into the expressive world in those specific modalities.
And very grounded in the sensorial. So it's
Yeah.
uh, so deeply developmental, so
Mhm.
deeply connected to our human limits and potentials, what
Mhm.
we are aware of, and so deeply what we're not
Yes.
aware of, and how healing and damaging all of that experience can be.
Mhm.
So what I'm hearing, Marshall, is the your integration of a healing process that truly does incorporate social cultural arrangements as well as the body and the mind, neuropsychology,
Oh, yes.
polyvagal, all the trauma theory. And
Yeah.
again, coming right back to where you initially grounded yourself with attachment, certainly is not just, I think sometimes a misunderstanding that attachment is somehow just about the infant and doesn't impact the entire lifespan.
Yeah, absolutely. The whether or not something feels traumatic in your system is largely influenced by what relationships had taught you about yourself in the world. And so we do forget how profound and pervasive it is. And it's only been in somewhat recent years that I've come to realize how much body is involved for me, and that a lot of the my modality work is just working in the earth. Sand tray and ceramics they're earth. They're the earth element, and that has such body representation to it. And so symbolic body and literal body, and as a person with a disability, I cross over into a lot of more advocacy, speaking and teaching for the world of disability rights and disability justice. And so that feels even important to me, that I have ways of conceptualizing body, which, our field historically has not always been
No.
generous in thinking about a lot of bodies. And so trying to reclaim what it means to think about self and body through a compassionate lens, through a lens that honors the impact of generational trauma, through a lens that says there are certain voices that are going to have been, disempowered to a place that is carried over into even how they hold and live within body. And I feel a lot of energy these days. I'm historically been kind of a timid, quieter person, and I'm learning
Mm.
other parts of me are going to be required, for the second half of my career. And I'm also finding inspiration from the sand and the clay for that.
Yeah, so I'm really drawn to how you're combining right there in your studio, giving clients an opportunity to connect with their body through the clay and through the sand, to truly immerse, as
Mhm.
well as yourself, and how you bring that. It's true. I think all of the disciplines in mental health, way for over a century, have distance from the body, and what a serious divide
Yeah.
that has happened. So now what you're bringing then ripples out as you hope the healing with one and with the family and with the parent child and with um, all those who come in contact with them. That what I'm hearing underneath that is new voices for you
Mm.
are being required to help that rippling of healing enfold, protect, keep safe, and yet at the same time, perhaps move out to help others understand.
That is really the goal for so many of us, isn't it?
Yeah.
That we want people to know they make sense.
Yeah.
That their reactions, their behaviors, their emotions, their beliefs, we're not here just to try and change them, that's not what healing means.
Mm-mm.
We first want you to know that you deserve to believe about your person that it has always made sense. And perhaps you've not been given the space and time and the context to understand what all of those reactions have been trying to do for you. But outside of connection to the vessel and to everything it contains that you're walking this planet with, that you're going to keep feeling lost and overwhelmed and incapable when the world is telling you that you need to change before you're comprehensible. And I don't know sometimes, to be honest with you, Dee, I don't know what to call myself anymore. Am I still a therapist? Am I? Because there's something shifting at an identity level about how I relate to the profession, that it feels like there's not yet a name for what it is I want to become, and what I believe might be required of me.
Yes.
But I've been doing this writing about why haven't I stepped more into that? When I've been surrounded with brave people and good friends in the field, why have I been hesitant? And I started realizing that I don't think there's a name for the kind of phobia that I've been carrying, but it's a phobia of the fear is who I might become if I give
Okay.
in to something that's evolving, and
Mm,
so not and even who I might have to become because of how the world is changing. And I think that so many people on this planet alter what feels true and right for them because they're afraid of what that's going to mean about them in the next moment. And I can't be a part of that, movement and that healing if I haven't found some peace,
yes.
with it in me. And so there's a journey happening, and
Right.
I don't know where I'm going with it.
The courage that you present for all of us to be open to new pathways, to new ways of naming ourselves or identifying, but very essentially to go back and reclaim some of the parts that have been held uh, and uh, not not been seen, not been witnessed, not been accepted, and that is not just about clients. That's about every single therapist, no matter what their field is. That all human experience on this life journey, however many days we have, is exactly what you're talking about right now. It's pausing, not knowing. Good thing sometimes to not know, to not fall into another rabbit hole, but to be receptive and open. I appreciate your courage as you share what you're going through in deep reflection, not in a cognitive, overly thoughtful analysis, but rather pausing, asking us all to be silent for a while and to go deeper into our experience. And that the phobia that you mentioned, that you described, um, what is it that you would then prescribe in your journey so far? What helps you to stay grounded and open, even when it feels like violent storms
Mhm.
are coming in?
I actually wrote a poem maybe last year on befriending risk, that I needed to find a reclaimed or different relationship with that word, with that
Mm,
concept. Um, and so I started by playing with risk, in everyday ways. And I then started having this sense of it's not here to threaten me. Like risk is in no way a problem. It's just preparing you for the type of bravery that's going to be needed in order to step through or step across or step into. And and yet risk is something that had often kept me quiet, and hidden. Um, I mean, just for so long, I had this deep desire for invisibility. That was just the thing I longed for, the ability just to kind of turn off form for a little bit. And a lot of that I think had to do with what I believed risk meant and how I was misunderstanding its purpose. So that has become more of a personal thing. I try to have these moments where I imagine holding its hand, and then we're stepping through things together, that it's not pushing me. It's really more of a companion. So that has become this abstract, gosh, sometimes I realize I do talk like a poet. And then I hear it.
beautiful.
But I hope that is logical. I hope that's coming through in a way that's
Oh, it's so
comprehensible.
powerful to be able to hold the hands of risk, because risk within itself has a baby that was intimidated, judged, shamed, whatever, for all of us. And that risk took on skills to cope. through all those early moments for risk. And so, as you describe risk, the vision comes to me of you with this open heartedness that you have
Mhm.
of holding risk's hand. And risk, I'm imagining, could be not only very small and very young, very adolescent, but also way beyond
Mhm.
our years, in the eldest of elders, that it
Oh
that
gosh.
risk is still present. And so I thank you for that.
Oh, you're making me very excited because it's like you've read the poem.
Oh,
Uh, would it feel okay to you if I
please,
read it to you?
please do. Would you?
Not a thing that I do very often, but there's too much overlap with what you're saying for me to ignore it. Um, my ancestors taught me to be an early riser. Even as a kid, eyes would pop open and smile crept in because it was silent. It was the only time my frenzied childhood home was quiet. In the stillness, no one could shut down a dream or redirect an outrageous plan. In the quiet, risk could be befriended because others' fear didn't interfere. In the quiet, I could sense risk in my courage spot. Past and future shared a bowl of cereal, and ancestors felt alive as they would whisper intuition and give permission to instinct. Risk and I played in the mornings, and my nerves danced with delight. Risk taught me art. Risk inspired discovery. Risk told me the truth. In the quiet, risk began to shape the ancestor I would one day become, making my spirit ready to meet a future early riser right in their courage spot.
Wow, the courage spot
Yeah.
and the visual images that come up from the words that you gift us. This poem just so reflects, it's timeless
Mhm.
and needed now. That's a beautiful gift of journey and depth. It's a beautiful gift for all. And I hear that is deeply personal for you. And what I want to say so much is how much I feel that the ancestor blanket enfolds me
Mm.
to the quietude, to the silence, to the moments, to listen for those different elements
Mm.
of experience. Thank
It's
you so
so
much.
sweet. That phrase, ancestor blanket. I mean, what a quilt. Can you imagine?
Yes, yes, yes.
Uh,
Yeah. We
yeah, I
need
have.
to hold that, right? We need to have
Mhm.
that and extend that blanket.
Yes, it's part of the complexity that I've been feeling, even in trying to introduce me in terms of my relationship to the profession and trying to figure out what I believe and who I've been and not dismiss, any of the goodness that has happened, but also giving permission to change and to let go of and to update identity in ways that I didn't previously know I needed. Um, I, I've got this dear colleague. Her name is Abby Esquivel, and she and I have been tinkering for years trying to find like in this overlapping energy that we have, what are we going to do with these instincts and these needs and these desires? And so we've created this 9-month program. It's called Rebodying the Self of the Healer. And when
Oh,
I was hearing you talk earlier, I was like, oh, it's like Dee was with us when we were
oh,
um, thinking through all of this, but
oh,
most of it is philosophical. Like we're using the expressive arts, but we're saying, what if you could go back before all of our available clinical theories were ever written about, and you got to make sure that your personal philosophy was represented in the pool of philosophies that theorists pulled from. And then
Mhm.
what if you created a theory from that? And it's caused me to realize the very nature of this poem and what we're talking about is I fundamentally, half of me comes from a culture that does not believe time is linear. And yet every clinical theory that's been presented to me assumes linear time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'm often been trying to like shove what I believe about healing into constructs
Hmm.
that don't represent, the deepest and most honest parts of me. And I think those are some of the dynamics that create these words and these terms we spend a lot of time of compassion fatigue or burnout
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
imposter syndrome. I think a
All
lot
that.
of those come from being asked to practice in a way that doesn't resonate with your deepest beliefs because it wasn't on the menu.
Exactly.
And so I'm trying to like rewrite the menu and then
Yep.
start again. I think is where I am in her dialogue right now.
That for it so resonates with me what you and your colleague are doing, and this is the vital work. All the language and nomenclature and yada yada that gets piled on and so damaging, so limiting, um, and we could have several conversations, and we may have another conversation that will plunge into opening up, because one of the questions that I asked toward the end is, what insight or wisdom would you like to pass to the new generations? And I think you just opened that door, but although I'd like to still pause there on that and ask you, Marshall, what led you to even enter this field? What about you? What about your lived experience brought you into the field?
It's such a mystery to me. I grew up in very rural East Texas. Um, and there I can remember it was so tiny, so tiny. The schools were very, very small and the people you entered kindergarten with, the 15 to 20
Huh?
other students, it's the same you graduated high school with. And you knew, like, from the time you entered school, you basically knew who all of your teachers were going to be, for the rest of the time. It's a very different way of being than most people. There was, I mean, therapist was not an option, I didn't even have it as a concept. It, we were pretty poor growing up, and so we didn't have access to media and television and in the ways that others might, like a bunch of channels, antennas, and you hope the two channels came through. And
Right.
on top of that, my parents were very religious. My dad was a pastor, um, and so there was some sheltering too. And so I didn't know much. Most everyone I knew, parents were, laborers and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
worked at factories and those sorts of things. So when I went to college, which didn't have a lot of precedence in my family, um, there was a minute where it felt a little like a responsibility. I didn't have a ton of deep connections to my past. But there was a sense that my mind had given me an opportunity
Mm.
that I needed to take advantage of. But all I could think that I wanted to do was be a writer.
Mm.
I mean, I
Mm.
I really tried to become something more pragmatic. I really did like feel like a bit of a pressure, but I couldn't. So I studied communication and English and journalism, um, and was working, at a newspaper, partly, and so I was 21 and getting ready to graduate. And one of my communication professors who had helped me, get into the newspaper said, "Hey, you're complimented my writing, but said, um, you write like a therapist. Are you sure that's not what you want to be?" Like, could we explore that? And so she had a friend, the marriage and family program I ended up at was the her friend was the director. And so she set up a day for me to go shadow him and just spend time with him. And then he just this is always the kind of strange part. I didn't really apply. He just
Mm.
he just invited me. And so most of my career has felt like I just kind of fell into holes. Like I just went
Mm.
walking along and then I was like, oh, okay, let's see where that slide takes
Yeah.
it. So I get these sometimes consultation requests where people will say, I'd like to learn how you, I don't know, I have no idea how this is what I do and how I got there. I just had to start working on reaching for the next thing that helped me make sense of what was happening, to go back to our earlier phrase. And um, when I was in grad school, I was exposed to Santre. Talk therapy wasn't really doing it for me. And when I got into Santre for the very first time, I think I was 22, the first time I had a little bit of training. I was like, oh, okay, like this is a portal. I can work with portals. I
Yeah.
know how to do that. Makes more sense to me than all the other things we've been talking about. And it became, the way that I interacted with the world was, through these in-betweens. And so my career then, because I loved metaphor, you know, went one certain, like the next and the next and the next and the next. And a lot of wrong turns. Like, to be honest with you, I I thought I was going to come out of that program and be a psych associate and not an MFT. So my first job was for a neuropsychologist writing reports. And turns out there's not a lot of room for metaphor in
No.
psychological evaluation.
Mhm.
So I lasted 5 months at that job. And then a lot of those kind of start and stops, I would move toward here and then realize, oh, this branch of mental health, what they say they are and how they exist
Mm.
don't exactly match. And so then I would back out and try again. And so it has not felt it's not felt as intentional as I think sometimes it looks. And one of the things that I've come to have some awareness about is maybe because of my early training, maybe because I was raised by a preacher, I can put words together. But because I can put words together coherently, that sometimes makes something sound a little bit more organized than it felt to live it. And it did not feel
Yeah.
ordered and organized as
Mm.
I've been just stumbling through. But the only other answer I have to your question as to how and what that I end up at, in a way that is it's still always a little strange to talk about. But I think my muscular dystrophy has been my teacher.
Mm.
I think it's the thing that was with me as a kid that didn't allow me to participate in life the way everyone else did. I couldn't work on the ranches. I couldn't play the sports. Like there were very few things available, especially to boys. And my mind worked different as well.
Yes.
I have some presentation in the way that my mind makes connections and the way that I think, and that left me also a little different. And so because, this body, this illness, required me to lean into other abilities to develop other parts of self. I think that's how I got to college, and then when I went to grad school, I'm trying to figure out like all these people are talking about healing, but it's a lot of able-bodied people talking about healing. And I don't really connect to that word the way the rest of you do. I don't feel that I'm going to be whole only when I'm healed.
Oh,
Let's back up and let's
yes.
and so I think it's been the muscular dystrophy that has been the primary instructor and the thing that has helped me know which holes to jump into. and has also kind of set the limits for me when I'm going a wrong direction. My illness tightens. My body is very reactive to stress or to just my poor choices. And so it shows up loud and like, okay, I can't keep going. It's not permitting me. So as much as I'm not wanting in any way to indicate, especially in this particular season, that disability is an easy road, um, I'm also not going to waste the lessons, that it has offered me. And I think that's probably been what's shaped me to this moment where I'm getting to sit and talk to you, a person I admire so much.
The way you describe a very keen awareness, probably very early, of being separate from all the other kids who were working on the farms and who were doing labor and who were able to do the sports. And then the nurturance of metaphor, of the poetics very early, the writer finding the challenge, the channel to work through. And then the courage that you take in earlier, you said falling into the like potholes or rabbit holes or something. And then just now, the awareness of the words that you used of actually stepping into
Yeah.
those holes. It's a beautiful it's a beautiful transformation of risk, of
Mm,
courage, of um, turning things around
mm,
to honor what you have,
mm,
and then giving honor to the complexity of ability disability,
mm,
of the skill that you have, and bringing
mm,
that right back to your body. Hey body, let's get into the clay. The way you describe the portal for sand, and the gift, it's such a mundane word, the transformative story that you just shared, so we all and those that we know can carry that forward, to ripple out, just to take the heart of tenacity and compassion
mm.
that you have, and bring that for ourselves. um, Marshall, if you were to give a critique, something that you would so want the mental health professions to be, to change, to transform, to incorporate, to grow, uh, what would you suggest? What would you most want them to change?
I, I feel the collective presence of my friends all holding their breath right now. Marshall, go slow. You scare people. There are a couple of things that have really been on my mind lately. One is to not be casual with use of the word safety. Um, that in order for someone to find safety in us, they're having to, and sometimes step away from another type of safety they've lived with for a long time of self-protection and the courage required, the risk, to go back to that word.
Yes.
Um, like when you say that word as a clinician, you should feel
Hmm.
what you're asking. Like you should feel
Yes.
the depth of that. And it's become a little too casual for my comfort.
Mm-hmm.
Not
Mm-hmm.
every client is living in the same world. And it's not just, what they're living through in their homes. It's what they're living through in their neighborhoods, in their communities, in their cities, in their states, in this country. Um, and and we should maintain some awareness of that. Another thing that really has bothered me for a little while is it seems to in our field we've accepted it as some responsibility to over-regulate people
Mm,
instead of just trusting dysregulation is sometimes exactly the energy that's needed to not just survive something,
yeah,
but to push through something or push against something.
yes.
And I just don't want to be a part of flattening people's nervous systems anymore.
Right.
Uh, and so I want people to feel trusted when they leave. I don't want to try and extract trust from them. I want to give the trust and then say, I believe in you. If your dysregulation is creating discomfort for you and you are looking for a place to land where you can experiment with what it might feel like to have other parts of your nervous system co-journey with you, I am on board, but I am not going to introduce an agenda and thinking that I believe I know what is best for you as you move forward. And then the third thing, I joke with myself. I don't know that I'll ever write again, but a book. But if I do, the one that's on my mind right now is something called the side effects of healing. That we do these informed consents and call it ethics, and we act like it's an exhaustive list. We don't have any idea what the hell the potential side effects are if someone changes. We don't know. We can't promise that you're not going to wake up one day and realize I can't be married to this person, or this career is costing me too much, or, oh, that's abuse. And I have to now move away from something, but I'm a disabled person and somewhat depend. Like it is a lot to
Yes.
believe that healing is possible, and it's even more it, arrogant to then sometimes
Yeah.
think we can predict, the outcomes of that. And so these subjects,
Yes.
as someone who hasn't been used to having a lot of fire, they are bringing quite a bit of fire to me these
Mhm.
days.
The thread that I'm reflecting on to to bring these three powerful fire in the belly. Graduate training isn't always safe. Internships aren't safe.
Mhm.
Supervision isn't safe.
Yeah.
So the the idea of safety as you described it, and then power. How is power being used in not only in the graduate programs and in the courses, and the beginning of control, the beginning of
Mhm.
that mm, behavioral formation, mandates, and the leveraging of shame, even if that's just subtle,
Mhm.
is stripping away, it seems to me, the very idea of the trust that you're talking about, the very idea of the perversion of healing.
Yes.
And the
Yeah.
and it certainly does then circle around to the space that you describe now very poetically of waiting and wondering in your own transformation about
Mhm.
identity and naming and all of that. So I wanted to
Mhm.
underscore that
Mhm.
the threads that you're describing are not only in the clinical field, that licensure is merely permission to go forward. It is not a statement about competency or ethics or
Mhm.
insight or sensibilities or anything.
Yeah.
It, and I think we're on the same chapter with that.
Oh, yeah. Sometimes it's something you have to overcome. It's
Yes.
a barrier to being a healer because so many of the standards, academic and licensure related, deconstruct people's intuition.
Yes. Yes.
I'm like, I can think of no greater quality that we have to partner with in order to show up well than intuition. But there's very little training I went through that taught me how to connect to that. I was meant to listen to other people's intuition,
Mhm.
and it baffles me how we've come to that place. And I don't want to just casually throw everything out. I want to benefit from the wisdom of people who have come before, and I want to know
Yeah.
what has largely been found to work and not work. But I also want there to be some honesty that not every thought that needs to be thought about healing has happened, and that very few of our people groups who deserve healing were represented or included in the ways that these things were considered and developed. And so we should be innovating, and innovation is going to require instinct and intuition and listening. And these are things that were a little bit skipped over in my personal
Yeah.
training. And I've had to then go back and deconstruct some of the harm that I inherited so that I can then rebuild, something that's a little bit more rooted in the qualities I want to
Mhm.
embody as I try to do this work. So I am right there with you.
Deconstructing takes then the willingness to step into risk and the courage to face what emerges, to immerse with honesty, with integrity. And that takes massive courage. I think it's all, everything we're talking about is also organic. There's no
Yeah.
template, there's no recipe. There is permission and then respect for the individual's journey.
Mm-hmm.
I always ask my interviewees to bring two symbols that are meaningful for them and to then share each one, each symbol with us, describe it, help us to connect with the symbol in a sensorial way, and then
Mm-hmm.
describe for us why you selected, why the symbol selected you today.
Mm. I do have a couple here. This first one, it it has metal um, outsides,
Uh-huh.
and it's got this kind of glowy paper orange at the back that is a little hard to tell, but it catches light and it kind of makes it reflect and
Yeah,
shimmer.
yeah.
Um, the logs feel like resin. You can feel that they've attempted to replicate. They've given a little texture to try and
Mm-hmm.
make it feel
Mm-hmm.
like wood. And it has, a light you can turn
Uh,
on back there. It's got a
uh-huh.
little battery operated tea light in the
Mm-hmm.
back that
Uh,
brings.
mm.
Um,
Yes.
and
May we see the sides, the back, the top
yes,
of that, Marshall?
yeah, here's the side,
Mm-hmm.
and the
Mm-hmm.
back is where the tea light
Yes, yes. Oh, look at
is.
that.
Yeah.
Oh, look at that portal. Yeah,
Yes. Yeah. Right through there. It's got a
yeah.
little Narnia energy. Where can we go?
And is that a connection for the exhale of the smoke?
It is. Yes, it is. It's meant to be a little pipe, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, no carbon monoxide today.
Yeah.
Only warmth, only burn. And
Ah, you mentioned burning and the fire, and of course, resonating with that warmth. That there's always danger in warmth, right?
yes.
With fire. But let me please support your description.
Mhm.
What is this? What are the elements of this symbol that are meaningful for you? What does it represent
Mm.
for you in the here and now?
I've been I've been working with the four elements the last few years. The part of me that has indigenous roots on my mother's side. Um, I've been feeling like I want to nurture some connection to. And so I've been trying to do more elemental meditations and trying to figure out, where have I neglected, and what are the consequences of some of the
Mm,
neglect. Um, so I have this tattoo right
hmm.
here on my wrist that's the four elements.
Oh, yes.
And when I had it done, he began and ended with fire, because he had this very sweet, he's an indigenous man, and he had a conversation with me about, you know, tell me why the elements, and let's be thoughtful about how we apply this to your body. And I told him historically I've been a little afraid of fire in the literal sense. I have some trauma in my background related to fire, but even more like metaphorically, I'm afraid of my fire. I've often been afraid of anger in me, not in other people. Um, and so I have anything that felt fiery, I quell. Um, and yet that's been limiting. And I don't want to live with that relationship to the element anymore.
Yeah.
So I've been trying to hold two qualities. In fact, both of the figures I chose today are meant to both hold these two qualities instead of one representing one and the other. Is I'm trying to hold humility and strength side by side,
Yes.
and fire does that,
Mm.
in this way. And I'm still choosing. I had some other fire, like I have an explosion, and I'm still going with the one in the fireplace. I'm giving it a
Okay.
little container.
Yes.
I'm
Yeah.
learning to
But visible.
relate.
So Marshall, we see the fire and we see what is nourishing the fire, the logs. It's yes.
And air.
I,
Air nourishes fire so beautifully. And so I've been learning that I have to work with breath in order to get to fire. And um, I have this wonderful assistant that's come into my life named Jacob, who is a wellness worker. He does breath work.
mm,
And so I have this constant breath presence in my life. And he is such an airy guy, but I feel more fire when we breathe together, And so I'm like, oh, yeah,
yeah.
I grew up in the country. I know
Yes.
oxygen
Yes.
makes fire burn. So there's something beautiful about welcoming in, that it's burning earth and it's
Yes.
feeding off air. And I am good at
Mm,
air and earth. And so I already have the makings of fire, and so I've been living there symbolically for a
mm.
little bit.
And your second symbol.
We went with the other element I'm trying to work on, and this is water.
Okay. Yes.
Let's see if we can let that focus for a little bit. This is a Georgia man figure. I'm going to hold it from a profile.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
Mm. I can
Uh,
see the striations of color
yeah.
all the way around, and then the the top. Yes. Oh, like a pond being.
Yes.
Yeah.
Pond with two faces, two forms,
Oh,
kind of floating around this water lily.
I
And
see.
they're just little symbols painted in
Oh,
all around. I mean, it is a journey. Every time I look at it, I see something new. So it's completely round. It's very heavy. It's a solid ceramic piece. Georgia Man is a beautiful ceramic artist. And this Terry Cotman, who I mentioned
oh,
earlier, had this
yes.
made for me as a representation of me and my wife.
Oh,
Um, and so it feels very personal to me knowing that it was
yes.
made, with us in mind. Um, but it's also, the thing about water and fire is they both have this ability to create as well as destroy.
Yes.
And so that requires holding humility and strength together. in a way that I'm trying to partner with these elements.
Yes, the breath, the air, the water, and we lose when water takes us in and we're consumed, it removes our air. And we gasp for air when we emerge
Mhm.
from water, from birth, you know,
Yes.
and so many images that for both of these. Um, if you were to just take a silent moment and ask both of them what message they have for you, what it may be a question, it may be a statement, but we take a silent moment to honor your connection now as a three.
Mhm.
You can hear them.
I can. Yeah.
Okay. And that those messages are private.
Mm.
Do these, and then there's a whole series of questions that you can explore. But for our viewers, then Marshall might look at how do they know each other? How long, if they known each other, how long have they known each other? Are they friends? Have they spoken before? What do they know? What do they hold for Marshall? That that is their unique capacity in the metaphoric, in the symbolic, in the representation. What memories, what experiences, and what unknowns? Water and fire. And the containers, they're
Mhm.
both containers. So when our viewers are working with their clients, but most especially when you're just working with yourself, that the first rule is always immerse yourself in the exploration, no matter the art or the expressive therapy, to understand the vulnerability, to understand the importance of privacy, to understand the value and dignity of silence.
Mhm.
Marshall, if they had something to say to us,
Mhm.
if the stove, the wonderful antique looking uh, fireside and the pond, if they were to speak to us, do they have something they want us to know?
Yeah, for sure. Um, their ancestors are very familiar with one another. Um, their particles come from the same original place. Um, and so I can feel this energy of how would how would views on healing change if humans didn't try to force us into a binary relationship? What if we aren't opposites? You know, what if you listened for a moment, not just to how we're different, but what we're trying to teach that might be similar? What if we didn't have to be categorized? Um, what if you realized that the laws that govern the particles that make us are the same laws that govern the inside of your mind? And you matched our rhythm instead of, trying to force us into yours.
Mm.
So there's a lot of what if invitations, like amplifying and enlarging uh, the way of contemplating power and responsible use of it.
Your sharing today really, for me, is reflected in the contained nourishment of the waters and the unification and the opening, the love and connection that's there, and the visibility of the fire, as Robert Bly suggests the fire in your belly, the poet within you, the writer, and the discover of who you can be without being defined
mm,
by very empowered institutions, organizations, training programs, and the world at large.
mhm,
I so appreciate being invited and welcomed to witness your fire. It feels so inspiring and engaging, inspirational for sure, warming. And there's always a place to let off some steam, as you've created there in that little bit. We get the warmth, but we can, woohoo, right? The heat you can generate from that little
mm,
stove, the
mm,
light that you can give off.
mm,
And yet it also reminds us of the darkness, the importance
mm,
that our light is embraced in shadow, in darkness, in the
mm,
blackness of this iron stove. And that to open that door, to welcome, to see the fire. Um, Very similar to Plato's allegory of the cave, I sense,
mhm,
is to strip away the illusions by facing the fire and allowing the molecules of air and fire to dance.
mhm,
And then the way you describe the early ancestors of fire and water, of coming from the same place, have been present for us through our entire evolutionary path.
mm,
But what we do with those now, what do we do with those now?
mm. Yeah.
So, Marshall, if you were to go back in time and wish that you could see your younger self, the new graduate student, the new intern, what would you like for him to know? What would you like? What do you wish that you had known then that you now know?
Um, One thing is that the casual references you're going to hear from people who govern and regulate this profession, who, most commonly teach and write, that make you feel excluded, um, that's not your burden to bear. And that there's going to be a point in time where other people are going to see those properties that live inside of you as valuable and desired. You need to be ready for that whiplash. You need to start preparing yourself. It's not a trick, that there's been room for you all along, and you just, hadn't been exposed to it. So
Or
don't run.
given permission,
Yes, give information.
definitely.
Stop running from the people. There's some good people out there. And then the other message is, there are going to be things within the larger mental health community that you're going to be directly and indirectly told you should be afraid of. Presentations that are critical and require extreme reactions and intense interventions, and you do not have to buy into other people's fear. In fact, those presentations were created because of fear, and you do not have to feed more fear into that. So start loving now the things that other people have called personality disorders and dissociation and
Yes.
because there are great teachers held within the things that we call symptoms, and you have the capacity to sit near them without needing to change them. Um, and I would very much want to speak that blessing to the young clinician in me.
That constrained intervention can be damaging, destructive, humiliating,
Yeah,
and
dehumanizing.
so dehumanizing.
Mhm,
And it may sound and be packaged and marketed so intensely. And the invitation to buy into that,
mhm,
as you just said, is also anchored in fear and in self-shame, uh, the attachment wounds that you spoke of early on, and their presence in the dampening of the drums, the drum beat.
Yeah.
So we can't hear it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's and that does not mean because I feel pushback. They're like, oh, but protection is needed. Like maybe, but maybe protection isn't what you were taught protection means. And I want to be different than how I was trained to be. And that's that's the journey, isn't it? That's where we're
It's
headed.
it's so it's so powerfully beautiful. The dignity and the integrity, the honesty that comes with that, rather than the conforming. And I probably am, maybe I sound a little over the top, but the rigid kind of conforming to to walk in mandate rather than flow in the depth of the beauty of who one really is in the world. And of
Mhm.
course, sorting that out is no easy task. You've invited people to get ready for that shift. What is it that you recommend they do? What might that you've
Mhm.
mentioned breath? What is it that you would recommend might be useful to now for those who you resonate with so well, who want so
Mhm.
much to follow your lead in this?
Mhm.
What are you recommending?
Put your healing first, and your healing isn't always going to come from traditional sources. So if you believe that art is a part of what you offer people, go to art class, not just to art therapy. You know, if you believe that drama and poetry is part of what could heal people, go to plays, go to poetry night, as well as training. You have to nurture the parts of you that you want to partner with in healing. And that's not only going to be in a continuing education environment. You're going to have to get outside of the echo chamber that is this field to listen to what these forms offer in their more pure versions at times. Um, I would want to say um, journal about what limits you from feeling brave.
Mm,
You know, ask yourself who are the invisible co-therapists that are coming with you into every session? Get to know them and ask, are they the people that deserve a seat on the couch with you? Is that what you deserve to believe about healing? Is that what your clients deserve?
mm.
So you have to do things that get to know these other aspects of who you are and what you believe and what you inherited, and to find the ancestor in you that knew about healing and directed your journey to this profession long before you ever knew. I read this thing months and months and months ago that just came back through my email recently that reminded me how many healers feel like black sheeps in their own family. But this writer said that if you were to able to access generational history, you would see there's no way you're a black sheep, that people made big moves for you to be exactly who you are. And as long as you're only punctuating it within a few generations, you get one version of yourself. But if you reach back deeper, you have the possibility of hearing whispers that could teach you and inspire you to versions of healer that you did not ever know were a part. But maybe just some little instinct has been waiting for the oxygen to be breathed into that spark. So that I believe in healing. I believe in therapists. I'm suspicious of the field, but I believe that that skepticism is part of how we innovate so that we don't kill it and we can find a way to bring some new life into it.
Marshall, so respect and feel grateful for your wisdoms, hard won, and that heartfelt depth that is shared. Is there something that we didn't touch on that you feel is important before we close?
Well, yes, but it's about you. So prepare yourself that we are going to have to give some credit to your
Oh,
voice. I mean, you have been such a steady source of bringing these dialogues into the field for such a long time, um, that I'm even thinking of one particular conversation you and I got to have
mm,
in Sedona, Arizona,
mm,
where
mm,
I get to witness your honesty and authenticity, the way that you can move into dialogue that is honoring of intention and perspective without compromising what you need to say and where you need advocacy. So those moments have really stuck with me, and I feel a lot of gratitude. And so I feel like I would be remiss if we ended our time together without returning some of that to you.
Marshall, thank you. Heartfelt, um, deeply caring authenticity that you bring is um, in dialogue and in just memory and presence is the healing in that most we walk the earth together and separate. And the more that we can share and open up and maintain that respect, that deep love that is so is the essential stream, the
Yeah.
essential early little fire. I'm very grateful for you and for your work and for all that you do to model for therapists constantly, surely for your clients and their families, and for sharing your life journey with us, Marshall. And I definitely would like to continue in a new conversation in another interview. We're going to focus in on some of these aspects where we might be able to grow and transform aspects of the healing professions. As you've already started with your colleague, of a vision and a language, a way of perceiving and honoring and opening up and inviting. So let's do that.
I would love that.
And to our viewers, thank you for being present. Marshall and I use our imaginations to know that you are there and to reach out to you and hope that our conversation, that our metaphors, that our images, and that our heartfelt intentions are in some way nourishing your path. Until next time, I'm Dee Preston Dillon. This is Marshall Lyles, and we thank you. Take very good care.